morning. Welcome to the panel entitled Legal Theological Revolutions on the Relationship Between Changes in the Perception of God and Developments of the Legal System. Our first speaker is Benny Porat, a senior lecturer and director of the Matz Institute for Research of Jewish Law at the Faculty of Law at Hebrew University. He completed his PhD in the Faculty of Law and was a postdoctoral fellow here at University of Toronto. Dr. Porat focuses on areas of theory of Jewish law, contract law, and distributive justice. He's the editor of the Jewish Law Review and co-editor of Shnaton HaMishpat HaIvri.
Thank you very much. Good morning. And I want to speak about the relationship between legal revolution and theological revolutions. And I'd like to here to suggest a kind of a general argument or general perspective about the history of Jewish law, and I would like to demonstrate it with one case study and develop a discussion about a specific period. So, of course, all of us know that the history of Jewish law is a long history, and there is many ways to tell the history of Jewish law. And I would like to offer here, I think, a new perspective or another perspective about this history. So I will divide my talk into two parts. And in the first part, I would like to present a general argument, and then to demonstrate it with one specific period. So the general argument goes like this. I think I want to put two trivial arguments, and my contribution will be the combination between the two. So, of course, we all know that the history of Jewish law is a very long history, and one can argue that the history of Jewish law is a kind of ongoing attempt to redefine the basic idea of jurisprudence, the conception of law, and the history of Jewish law is a kind of sequence of many jurisprudential revolutions with regard to the concept of law. This is one trivial argument. The other, I think, trivial argument is the same true with regard to the history of Jewish philosophy. Also, the history of Jewish philosophy is an ongoing attempt to understand or re-understand the idea of God, the conception of God. And the history of Jewish philosophy is also a kind of a sequence of many revolutions with regard to the understanding of God. The theology of the Bible, for example, is completely distinct from the theology of the Canadic period. And of course, this is completely distinct from the theology of Maimonides, the theology of Maimonides, and it goes on till modernity. So my argument is that it's worth considering the option that there is some correlation between these two revolutions, between these two developments. That at each period that we can see development in the idea of law, in the redefinition of the most basic assumption of jurisprudence, we can see also correlative development in the idea of God with regard to theology, and there is close correlation between the two. That these two processes go hand by hand, and in a sense, I think this is a new way to see the history of Jewish law through the lenses of theology. So the theological story of the development of Jewish law. And before going on and to give one example, I would like to put on the table two pre-assumptions I think will be very important for our discussion. The first pre-assumption, I think it's quite trivial, but it's worth also say a few words about it. Of course, when we speak about the concept of God, of religion, we have to assume complexity with regard to these concepts. Of course, we are not dealing here with a binary question of whether to recognize the existence of God or to reject it, but there is a broad options of understanding the idea of God, and therefore the moves, the changes that we will see is not from religious to secular, but inside the religious atmosphere between several options of understanding the idea of God, and the same true with regard to the question of religious law. The question of whether a specific legal system is religious is not a binary question of yes or no, 1 or 0, but it's a complex question. I would like to address you to an important article of Mori Rabbi, Professor Ben Menachem, which he's generous enough to commented on this lecture about the complexity of the question whether a specific legal system is religious or not. It's not a question of yes or no, but there is a wide range of parameters, and therefore this is also a complex question, and also the moves from one option of religious law to another is inside the religious atmosphere. Another pre-assumption before we're going on is here we will speak about correlation and not causation. So I will not try to argue that theology affects jurisprudence, because it also can work vice versa. It also could be that when Maimonides, for example, is developing new jurisprudential understanding, then theology is not the cause, but the result that it reflects itself in new understanding of the idea of God, or it works in both directions, that theology affects jurisprudence and jurisprudence affect theology, or there is third reason that affects both theology and jurisprudence, and therefore I will not speak here about causation, but about correlation between these two realms. So of course we can go with this project, and actually my project is about looking inside the biblical revolution, the connection between the biblical theological revolution and the biblical jurisprudential revolution. Of course, Maimonides was an important player in some of the last sessions, and is a good candidate for analyzing the connection between theology and jurisprudence, and Nachmanides, and you can go on to modernity. I would like to concentrate here about, well, I lost my timer, so I need a reminder with regard to time. I would like to speak here about one specific case study, and I would like to speak about the Tanaitic revolution. Many scholars drew our attention in the last year to the fact that at the first 2 centuries we can see the phenomena of the birth of the halacha. The legal world of the Tanaim has no similarity in previous halacha, neither in biblical law nor in sectarian law before the 2 first centuries. Something happened in the land of Israel at the first 2 centuries, and we see no understanding of the idea of law, no understanding of the idea of halacha, and therefore we speak about the birth of the halacha. What I will try to argue here, that the reasons for the reasons or aspects or reflections of the birth or rebirth of the halacha, of the legal understanding of the Tanaim, has some correlation, has some roots in their new theology, and their new theology can explain their jurisprudential innovations. Now, I have to clarify that when we speak here about the birth of the halacha, we are not speaking about the birth of one specific halacha, of one specific norm. We're not speaking here about innovation with regard to the laws of marriage, or the laws of divorce, or the laws of Shabbat. We're speaking here about the very nature of the legal system, about structural characteristic of jurisprudence, how we understand the system of law. So if you have to speak about the new religious experience of the Tanaim, so of course there are many parameters or characteristics that distinct the religious experience of the Tanaim from those of the religious experience of the Bible, and I won't go all over the parameters, just a few highlights. And if we have to pinpoint one specific element that makes the religious experience, the theology of the Tanaim, to be distinct from the biblical theology, so I think we should go to the metaphor of the state of God's face. I think this could encapsulate the new religious experience of the Tanaitic.
This is a part of the story. The confusion between law
This is a new animation.
Yes,
Divine intervention.
Yeah. It's too sophisticated.
No one the hidden face.
This is the hidden face of the Tanaitic. Okay. God's face was revealed. Okay, so so of course, if we speak about the biblical experience of God's face, we speak about Gilui Panim, of the revealed face of God. God's communicate with people through miracles, through prophecy, and this is the most highest religious experience that a person can have. Seeing a prophet, having explicit miracles, and therefore the most central spiritual figure in the biblical period is of course the prophet and the priest, but I won't speak about the priest. And for example, with regard to the idea of Talmud Torah, there is a biblical idea of Talmud Torah, mitzvah Talmud Torah, but Talmud Torah has an instrumental value in the world of the Bible. You have to learn in order to fulfill the mitzvot. There is no analytical idea of interpretation, of analyzing the Torah, but it's mostly about reciting and learning it by heart in order to apply the commandment. Something happened at the first 2 centuries, and the most important religious experience of the Tanaim is of the hidden face of God. That God is no more revealed himself to people. There is no miracles, there is no prophecy. Of course, there are some exceptions, and I don't want. Of course, the story is a bit more complex, but generally speaking, there is no miracles anymore, there is no prophecy. The revealed face of God is something that belongs to the past, something that will belong to the future, but the constant experience is of a revealed face. Of course, the prophets are no longer so central, and instead of prophets, we can see the rise of new spiritual figures, a halachic sage, which does not exist, of course, in the biblical literature, and he is the leading of the religious life. And of course, one of the applications is the idea of Talmud Torah. The idea of Talmud Torah becomes an end by itself, and it's not only an instrumental value in order to fulfill, but recalls the famous declaration of Rabbi Akiva, Gadol Talmud Mi'maseh, studies greater than practice. And Talmud Torah becomes one of the most important ways of a person, by learning the law, to meet God's idea. What are the legal jurisprudential applications of such theological move? So there are many jurisprudential applications. I would like to split them, to divide them into two. One group of set of changes I think are quite trivial, and I would like to do it very briefly. This is not the contribution that I'd like to contribute here, but one set of changes, we can call it rationalizing the law. So I will do it very briefly, because I think this is well known and quite trivial, and this is not my specific contribution. But we can see how the legal world of the Tanaim becoming much more rationalized. And when I'm speaking about rationalized, I'm not speaking about the content of the norms, but about the structure of the system. So of course, with regard to legal decision making, while in the biblical period, at times decisions are made by through divine intervention. Remember the bitter water of the Mei Sotah and the Urim Tumim and Not Tzlafchad. Of course, in the Tanaitic period, there is no place to divine intervention, or at least there is dispute about it. Lo b'shamayim, and the idea is that legal decision making is made through human decision only. Lo b'shamayim. Or for example, with regard to the human contribution to the law. While in the biblical period, the contribution of humans to developing the law is mainly with regard to transition of the law to the next generation. The Tanaitic idea is that humans should contribute to the law by developing the law, by interpreting the law, and of course this is a big project of midrash, of halachic exegesis. And in a very recent article of Halbertal, he drew our attention to the fact that how much is that? Okay. In a very interesting article of Harvital, he drew our attention to the fact that while in the biblical legal structure, the okay, 30 minutes.
7.
Okay, 30, please. No. While in biblical period, the most fundamental legal unit is the mitzvah, the commandment, which is very short, laconic, succinct unit. And therefore the Bible is able to draw all of the idea of Shabbat to encapsulate it in a very few verses. The fundamental legal unit in the world of the Tanaim is not the mitzvah but the halacha. And this is the birth of the idea of the halacha. And the halacha is something that is more detailed, systematic, and the very few verses of Shabbat are becoming Ilchot Shabbat or Masechet Shabbat, which is a very long, detailed system. And we can go on. I don't want to focus on this aspect, but we can see how the Tanaim are developing the idea of classification of the law, horizontal and vertical classification, which we don't find it in a biblical period. We can see how the Tanaim are developing the idea of disputes, which has no place in legal jurisprudential worldview. We can see the idea of error, the idea of doubt, which the Tanaim are developing, and this is well connected to the idea that God does not reveal His will anymore, and the sages are the most important reading. So all of these parameters go to the set of rationalizing the law, and I think this is quite trivial. But if I would have stopped here my talk, I think what could have argued that the move here is not from a religious understanding of the law to new understanding, religious understanding, but from religious understanding of the law to non-religious understanding of the law, because rationalizing the law is not something that's unique to religious law. Also, modern legal system, we can characterize them as rationalized. Modern secular system is also recognizing the idea of disputes, the idea of errors, the idea of doubts, the idea of classification. And therefore, Professor Ben Menachem asked in his paper, is Talmudic law a religious law? And his answer is less than biblical law, because it's not that it's not religious, but it's less religious because it's more rationalized. What I would like to contribute here in this lecture is to draw our attention to these developments of the Tanaim, which they are developing new religious aspects of the law, new characteristics that are not to be found, thank you, neither in biblical law. We won't find this characteristic in biblical law, and also not in modern secular law. This is something that is completely unique to the Tanaitic period, or the Tanaitic period, and from then on in the halachic history. And I think this could get their explanation by the theological basis of their experience. So I have a few examples. I'll try to give at least two. In a very interesting paper of Aaron Shemesh, he drew our attention to the fact that while, with regard to the question of the relationship between law and space, while in biblical law, and the same is true goes also with regard to sectarian law, the understanding of the law is that the law is applied only in a specific territory. The Bible, and if we read it freely, we can get the impression that the idea that the law should apply in the land of Israel only. And there are a few examples for that. If we have time, so I will elaborate in a minute. We can see that one of the innovations of the Tanaim is that the law should apply not in the land of Israel, but only out of the land of Israel. The move here is from territorial application of the law to an exterritorial application of the law. Maybe to give one example, we are Passover is just around the corner, so look for the interesting midrashic move for the law of Pesach. If we read Exodus with regard to the law of Pesach, we can get the impression that Pesach should be kept, according to the Bible, in the land of Israel only. And it will be that when the Lord takes you into the land of the Canaanite, the land which He made an oath to your father that He would give you, you will do this act of worship in this month. Now, when the Tanaim are coming to this verse, they are reinterpreting it in a way that the commandment of Pesach should be kept not only in the land of Israel, but also out of Israel. And here we can see in the Mechilta, and it will be must mean immediately, not in the land of Israel, but also in the desert. That the Lord takes you, you must perform a commandment that in its reward you shall enter the land. So the entering the land is not a condition to fulfill the law, but this is a reward that you will get. What is the idea behind this move from a territorial understanding of the law to an exterritorial understanding of the law? What I would like to suggest here that the new theology of the Tanaim plays an interesting role with this regard. When we speak about a revealed law, when the law is a revelation of God, so the duty to perform the law, to apply the law, is in the place of the land of the king, the land of God. But when the Tanaim has an experience that God does not reveal himself, and the law is not something that God reveals himself to humans, but the law is part of the ladder that a person is climbing from one step to another to meet his God. Then just as a person out of the land of Israel should learn the law, should pray to his God, he also needs to perform the law out of the land of Israel. So here we can see a universal understanding of the idea of the law, and it's connected, I think, to their religious understanding of the role of law. Last example, maybe we have a minute and a half. Another interesting article of Aaron Shemesh, which he connected to another reason, is about the nature of the rules. The well-known distinction between lechatchila and b'diavad from the outset and after the fact. This is also a new innovation of the Tanaitic period. There is no such an idea of distinction between lechatchila and b'diavad, neither in biblical law nor in sectarian law. The idea is when God reveals his will, so this is the minimum and the maximum that you have to do at the same time. The Tanaim are developing the idea that the law is more complex, and there is some degrees in the law, and there are some demands that you have to do them, but if you do more, it will be better. And this is a very interesting structural idea of the law. What is the explanation for this idea? Aaron Shemesh has his own explanation. I'm not convinced by his explanation, but it might be that it's also connected to the idea that the law is not only the place where God reveals himself, but it's a kind of a ladder. And if it's a ladder, a religious ladder, then we have to have some steps. And one should climb from one step to another step, and therefore the law is a kind of a process that one should get advanced from one step to another, and therefore the idea of the law is more complex. Just to conclude, I think if I'm right, then there is a close, interesting correlation between theology and law. I think this is a new way to see the history of Jewish law, and of course with necessary changes, and it might be relevant to other periods as well, maybe even to the Judeo-Arabic period. Thank you very much.